And I'm pleased to join you at the beginning of what I think is a very important conference. The whole of the insurance sector is very important. It's very important to our economy, and it's important to the operation of very critical institutions. But as I'm sure that you're all aware, I think the whole sector, including the claims sector, is facing some major challenges. And those challenges are not just about profitability, though indeed they include that, but they're also about changing notions of liability, changing perspectives on consumer rights, and indeed on the delivery of justice. And in addition to all of those factors, technological advances are opening up new challenges. Well, my focus today is on whiplash, the soft tissue industry, undefined and often unprovable. And I just want to say something about how I became involved in this topic, or what kinds of changes have been made and where I think the future might lie. You might wonder how it's come about that members of Parliament and the Transport Select Committee in Parliament, a cross-party committee of 11 MPs, became involved in this topic. Our remit as a select committee is very broad. We're concerned about all matters to do with transport. We're a scrutiny committee. We're there to challenge policies if we think they're not going properly, to listen to what the public are saying, to conduct inquiries and to try to secure change to make things better. And our remit is very, very wide. If you think about transport, road, rail, sea, aviation, a very, very wide remit. So how was it that we became involved in this issue of motor insurance in general and whiplash in particular? Well, it was because it came to us as, in fact, a consumer issue. And we received, as individual MPs, many, many representations from members of the public about the rising cost of motor premiums, and that's how it all started. And of course that was and remains a very, very important matter. And most people have access to cars, and at the time we started our inquiries, of the 26.4 million households in the UK, 19.6% had motor insurance. And the cost of those premiums was rising very, very rapidly, rising for everybody. And in fact, there was an annual rate of increase of around 30% at that time. And in particular, the increase for young drivers was very, very intense and making insurance almost unobtainable for many. So there was a rising concern amongst members of the public about the cost of premiums, and representations were made to us, and we decided that this was an issue that we should start to look at. Well, I'd say that of all the different inquiries we've undertaken, and there have been many, and many of them very controversial, this was one that when we started it really unleashed the most voluminous correspondence with members of the public, more, I think, than I've had from many other issues. And that came in the form of calls, emails, letters, representations, all from people saying what's going on in motor insurance is terrible, and people talking, yes, about the cost of the premiums, but also lots of very, very detailed letters I started to get with people saying how they felt that the whole insurance sector was not functioning properly. It was dysfunctional, they said. People were talking about experiences they'd had, where they'd had what they'd regarded as very minor incidents in their cars, and there was some mysterious transfer of information about what they regarded as a minor incident, hardly known about by anybody, and then phone calls from motor repairers, dealers, and all kinds of people in motoring organisations suggesting they make claims, cold calling, and people suggesting they make claims for accidents they hardly remembered they'd ever had, and then experiences of if they had had accidents, about the costs of repairs, vehicle hire issues, a whole range of things. And the volume of this correspondence was so intense, I think I'd allayed my initial minor doubts about whether this was an area we should be involved in, to think, yes, this is something here which is very serious. And we started off all of this in 2010, and 4 reports later we're perhaps in a rather different situation. And one very important set of facts that became apparent soon after we started to look at this was that while the number of accidents on the road was mercifully going down, the number of people killed and seriously injured, in fact, was falling by about 20% between 2006 and 2013, and serious accidents fell. Very, very good news. But the number of motor injury claims, motor insurance injury claims, increased rapidly, in fact increased by 109% from the average for 2000 to 2005 to 2011 to 12, rapid increase. And it was specifically whiplash where the biggest increase took place. Whiplash claims peaked in 2010-11 at over 560,000 in that year, over 70% of personal injury claims, and very, very high percentage of claims and rising. So the first question was, is all of this real? Are there really all of those whiplash incidents? Is it genuine? What's the cost of it? Is that one of the reasons for driving up the cost of motor premiums? And what did we find? And when I say we have our inquiries, what that means is that we put out a public call for evidence and information, and we did receive a terrific response from the whole of the insurance sector, from all aspects of it, including the claims management companies, insurance companies, vehicle repairers and solicitors on all sides, acting in all areas, consumers, many other people as well. So we had lots of information, lots of people who came to our committee. We questioned written information that we tried to analyse. Well, what did we find, and what were the things that we identified? First, I think it's right to say that certainly whiplash wasn't the only issue. And we did talk about what we called a dysfunctional insurance market and a merry-go-round of commissions and referral fees involving insurance companies, vehicle repairers, medical people, lawyers, incentives to claim, cold calling on a massive scale, including when I was on my way to committee hearings and received bombarded with text messages asking me why didn't I claim for accidents which actually I'd never had. So just a little reminder in case that wasn't on my mind as I went to my sessions. The high death rate of young drivers, another factor, horrendous figures there on the high accident rates and death rates of new drivers and young drivers, and uninsured driving. And then we come to the whole area of fraud stroke exaggeration. First, clear fraud, cash for crash, criminal activity where action now is increasingly being taken against that, organised gangs. Things where, is it fraud, is it exaggeration? Claims for whiplash, soft tissue injury. I'm sure that there certainly is such a thing, and it would be unjust, grossly unjust, to do anything that denied there was any such injury. But are all the claims justified? Was this rapid increase in whiplash claims really reflecting a reality? And again, we looked at that peak in claims and found with quite a lot of surprise that many, in fact most of the claims for whiplash were in fact settled by insurance companies without any kind of medical assessment. And when we challenged the insurance companies on that, we were told, well, it costs so much to do this, the answer isn't terribly clear anyway, and really it's cheaper not to do it. Well, maybe, but what sort of message does that send out? You say you've got a problem called whiplash, and perhaps you've been encouraged to say you should do that by the cold calling and all the other things that went on. You know pretty well no one will ever do any kind of assessment on it. So it's very, very tempting, isn't it, for people who certainly would not see themselves as doing anything fraudulent. And I think still there is a kind of question mark about where's the difference, where do you cross the line from a criminal fraud cash for crash, very clear case of that, to something gross exaggeration, which isn't really reflecting reality. Well, what has happened since the time we started to look at that in 2010? And several reports later, lots of parliamentary debate, engagement with the insurance sector, with all aspects of it. What's happened and what has changed? The Insurance Fraud Bureau, financed by the insurance sector, has been set up and is operating, and I think is being effective. And I've heard some complaints about it from people, and people telling me that unless the insurance companies want cases pursued there, they're not pursued there. I'm not quite clear if that is correct or not, but there isn't any long-term funding for that. But certainly it's operating, and I think it's had an effect. There have been big changes on medical assessments for insurance claims, and we thought that no whiplash claims should in fact be settled without a medical assessment, and we were told no, that couldn't be. But there are very significant changes in that whole area, and medical assessments now are to be conducted by independent medical professionals with fixed fees, and from January 2016 Medco is to approve accredited experts, and there is an interim situation after the 6th of April this year. The first representations on soft tissue claims must be at a fixed cost and made by a medical reporting organisation via the Medco portal. So that's the beginning of what I think could be a very, very significant change in this whole area. After the 1st of June too, and this year, claimant legal representatives must undertake checks on claimants to see if previous claims in that area have been made. And that's another of the areas that we identified where there was a problem. Very, very little information, if any, around on previous claims made by individuals which either were fraudulent or might have been suspected to be fraudulent. Now, there are issues there to do with data protection, yes, to do with assumptions of guilt that are not proven, and I certainly recognise that, but I see there is a move there to do something about that. And there are moves afoot to in this change on medical assessments and in setting up Medco to try to prohibit experts producing reports from being the same people who treat claimants, because that's a very common practice and clearly a conflict of interest there, so a move to try to do that. There have been other moves too, banning of incentives for claiming, such as giving cash, presence of tablets, and a ban on referral fees for solicitors, barristers, insurers and claims management companies. I don't think that one is as clear-cut as it sounds. I think alternative business structures find another form perhaps of doing exactly the same thing, and I think perhaps the industry is adapting in a different way, and so I welcomed the ban, but never felt that really would be the end of the story. And of course, too, the Competition and Marketing Authority launched its investigation, and it made recommendations, including bans on agreements between price comparison websites and insurers, which stop insurers making their products available more cheaply on other online platforms, called for clearer information. But it did stop short of calling for what it called proportionate and effective remedies in terms of vehicle repair abuses too. So there are a lot of question marks about the competition authorities' recommendations on that. Well, some changes then have been made, I would say specifically in relation to medical reporting, and I think that's going to be the area of focus for the future. But what else is going to happen for the future? Where should we be looking? An insurance fraud task force has been set up, chaired by the former Law Commissioner David Herzl, who will consider the range of insurance fraud and to make recommendations. And the objective of his work is to reduce premiums and to protect the rights of honest consumers. And an interim report is expected, I think, in the next month or two, with a final report from his commission at the end of this year. So again, that's clearly is very important work, looking at what's happened now and which way we're going. So what are the results up to now, what's actually been delivered? Whiplash claims have fallen, but other personal injury claims have increased, and there are increasingly reports sought on psychological injury. And the government told us that in 2012-2013, 87% of road traffic personal injury claims related to injuries to the neck and back. So a move away from whiplash, but a concentration of injuries in other areas as well. And the insurance sector is cyclical in its premiums, and yes, some claims of premiums have gone down, but it's suggested too that some of them might be going up. And what we've been trying to do in our committee is to find ways where fraud can be reduced, that reductions in costs can be passed to the consumer in the form of reduced premiums, and the insurance sector said that would happen. I'm a little sceptical if that is actually going to be the reality, because we came in at the beginning of this because of high premiums, and we want those to go down. But also to ensure access to justice. And certainly as far as some insurance companies are concerned, I'm sure they want to reduce costs, reduce claims, whatever. But there are people with very genuine claims, and certainly in our endeavours to reduce fraud and exaggeration, we don't wish to exclude people from having access to justice. So for me and for my committee, that matters very, very much as well. And it is, of course, really very difficult, notoriously difficult, to really establish the level of fraud. And when we did our inquiries, we had all kinds of widely ranging estimates, from a figure of, I think, from one sector, 0.5% of claims fraudulent, to someone else 60% fraudulent, and saying that we were the whiplash capital of the world. But none of this is provable, but clearly there are significant pointers in what happens. Well, last week we produced a report on motoring, but a rather different report on motoring of the future. And we looked at how motoring might develop over the next 20 years, 10 to 20 years, and looked specifically about how motoring could be transformed by new technologies, the use of autonomous driving aids and communications, and including the development of driverless cars, where at the moment there are trials being carried out, 3 trials being carried out in 4 cities here in the UK to see how that can work. And that, of course, does have major implications for the future for the insurance sector. And it could be that manual, semi-autonomous and driverless cars may all be on the roads together. It will mean a lot of changes in driver training and in vehicle certification. And it will raise new issues about liability. If there are accidents, who's responsible? The driver, the owner. We're going to have a move to more leased vehicles, the software manufacturer, the car manufacturer. New issues of liability, which I think will pose new questions for the whole of the insurance sector, and indeed new opportunities for fraud. Well, little did I think when that we embarked on this issue in 2010 that this would lead to what has become a torrent of activity, several further reports, and major actions by the industry itself, by government and by the judiciary in changing both the law and regulations. Significant changes have been made, I think, first in highlighting this issue, in tackling criminality, in addressing fraud, and in particular looking at assessments of injury and trying to eliminate or perhaps reduce conflicts of interest. But many questions do remain. The objectives do have to remain: reducing fraud while maintaining access to justice and bringing down the cost for the consumer. And all of this in a very changing and challenging environment. Quite a challenge for the future for all of us. Thank you.